Doug Martin, an innocent young man, spends his summer at his family's lake house. His life turns when he meets a married woman with whom he would bargain anything to have her. As the Martin family approaches Lake Lure, Doug is mesmerized by the beauty of the lake and the sight of several women. Upon arriving at their lake house, Doug's best friend, Carson, cheerfully calls out to his friend's parents, wanting to hang out with his friend already. Moments later, the two best friends meet up and discuss their summer plans. Of course, both are already eyeing some women around them. As they walk towards the local bar, Carson pokes fun at his best friend's personal life, targeting his rejections from several girls. Inside, they come across the local sheriff named Big Jack. The sheriff throws a considerable gesture by putting everyone's beer on his tab, and the crowd goes wild as he sings on stage with them. Then, Carson proudly welcomes Doug back for summer and puts an apron on his friend, ready to work at the bar. Later that day, Doug goes home and reminisces about the place as he looks at the pictures in his room. Overhearing a man next door, he peeks out his window and sees an unfamiliar couple. A wealthy investor named Elliot Harper and his wife Lena rent the big white house next door. While Doug checks his bike, he catches sight of Lena, and they both glance at each other. Later on, the two friends head to their secret hideout, a boathouse explicitly for women and beers. Carson gladly reassures his friend that he will have a great summer. On his way back home, Doug sees his father calling out to him outside their newly moved-in neighbor's house. The young man formally meets Elliot as his parents get acquainted with him. After getting to know each other, Elliot befriends the Martin family. Then, Doug gets invited to check the rich man's boat the following day, to which he accepts. The next day, Doug checks his neighbor's boat. As he continues, his attention diverts to Lena, who has just finished swimming, and heads to the shower. Shortly after, Elliot arrives and asks what the boat's status is, to which the young man responds in full detail. So the rich man hires the young lad to take care of his boat. That night, Doug is having trouble falling asleep, so he looks out his window and sees Lena in her room. To his surprise, he sees Elliot being aggressive to his wife. The following day, Doug maintains Elliot's boat and curiously asks the investor how he can afford big purchases. The investor explains it all comes down to risk in investing. Later at home, Doug hears Lena screaming at a distance. Panicked, he runs towards her, and they get acquainted when he helps her fix her car key jam in the ignition. Afterward, the woman subtly flirts with the innocent lad. Hours later, the young man goes to work at the bar and tells Carson about his encounter with Lena. In a serious tone, Carson warns him about Elliot and to keep a lookout for the guy. That night on his way home, Doug meets Lena. She asks for his help, claiming she accidentally locked herself out of her house as it begins to rain. To enter the house, Doug smashes the window with a rock and enters to unlock the door from inside. In the kitchen, Lena notices the man's wound on his lower abdomen due to the glass shard of the broken window, so she lifts his shirt and cleans the wound. Not long after, Doug kisses the woman and the tension between them continues to build. Eventually, they spend a passionate night together until they end up in bed. The following morning, Lena asks Doug if he's ever been with a woman, but he jokingly returns the same question if she's ever been with a woman before. She replies once or twice, and the man admits it's his first time. Then, she tells him not to tell anyone about their secret relationship. At the lake, Carson and Doug spend some time together. Carson reveals that his best friend mistakenly dialed him last night and plays a voicemail of Doug having a pleasurable time. Uncomfortable, the shocked friend stops the recording. In excitement, Carson points out some girls that may interest his best friend. However, Doug turns his advice down and jumps into the lake. Carson immediately follows, and the two friends enjoy their time together. Days pass, and the affair between Doug and Lena continues to grow. One morning, Lena arrives at the boat while Doug is doing his job. She invites him inside the boat and he abides. Here, she tells Doug that she can't stop thinking of him, and the man can't agree more. Afterward, Lena seduces him and doesn't falter in doing so. Soon, the atmosphere gets heated and they make love in the boat. At the bar that night, Doug sees Lena, who looks disheartened now that Elliot is back from his business trips. Concerned for her, Doug checks up on her at a convenience store the next day. Here, he sees Lena, who entices him to follow her outside, where they do the deed. Suddenly, Elliot enters the store, and the two almost get caught during their tryst but manage to get away with it. Moments later, while the young man cleans his neighbor's boat, the investor summons Doug. Elliot lectures him to do a better job after spotting a crack that hasn't been sealed properly. Then, the investor mentions he'll be out of town tonight for work. The next morning, Lena tells Doug that she can't help but feel like she's stealing his youth. With pride, the naive man responds that it's his best youth. Then, he caresses Lena's body in her husband's bed, and and he notices a tattoo on her leg. He questions her what it is, so she explains that it's a matching tattoo she shares with her first love. Afterward, she gives him an untraceable phone, insisting that they should keep in touch with each other. However, it must be kept hidden. Right after, they go to the kitchen, and the gardener witnesses their affair. Morning comes, and Elliot and his wife waits for Doug at the dock to test whether he did a good job maintaining the boat. When the young man arrives, Lena leaves the two men alone, but her husband insists that she join, so she abides. While sailing, the engine overheats, frustrating Elliot, so he blames the younger man. As a result, Doug intimidatingly tells the investor to be careful, triggering Elliot. However, Doug diverts the meaning of what he just said to avoid conflict. The investor proceeds to go inside the boat while Lena observes them. Then, Doug sees Lena's bruise, which makes him worry, and checks up on her. She expresses how much he despises her husband and is worried because Elliot is taking her back to Raleigh tonight, where she plans on asking for a divorce. That night, Doug wakes up from Lena calling him on his phone. He picks it up and Lena tearfully tells him that she's in Raleigh, outside the medical center. Immediately, he rushes to her aid and advises Lena to report it to the police. However, she's scared of what Elliot and his family can do to her if she ever publicizes his abuse toward her. She adds that her husband will be out of town for 2 weeks. Concerned, Doug decides to protect Lena instead. Days pass and they secretly continue their affair and make love in the boathouse. One morning, Lena calls Doug to come to her house immediately. Night falls and the young man arrives at her place, wondering if her husband found out about their affair. Suddenly, he notices the mirror's reflection and sees Elliot lifeless on the floor. Lena reveals she hit him with the nearest thing she found as defense from his attacks. Madly in love, Doug decides to help Lena cover up this massive scandal. Shortly after, Doug works his shift at the bar. Anxious, he accidentally drops a bottle of alcohol. Carson asks his friend what's wrong due to his odd behavior, but Doug rages at him. After finishing his shift, the worried man heads home. Rushing to go upstairs, his mother calls him to join them for a second outside, and to his surprise, he sees Lena. The two pretend they're only acquainted and play along without suspicion. Moments later, Doug goes to Lena's house. As the clock is ticking, the two must devise ways to dispose of Elliot's body. Eventually, both agree to throw the corpse out into the lake. Afterward, Doug cleans the crime scene and gets on the boat with Elliot's body, almost getting caught by the chief security officer. Luckily, Doug's disguise convinces the officer that he's Elliot himself. It did not take long for the police to arrive at the crime scene. Sheriff Jack identified the victim as Elliot Harper, so the police head to the Harper's residence. Meanwhile, Doug starts getting flashbacks of last night. Every detail haunts him, and how he chose to burn Elliot's body along with his clothes used as a disguise. One evening at work, Carson approaches Doug and tells him he's become the talk of the town because he's the one who fixed Elliot's boat that supposedly combusted. Gus, a local, informs Doug of a particular insurance policy that will possibly provide $5 million for Lena following the death of her husband. On the other hand, Lem, the town deputy, calculates that the insurance is equivalent to $10 million, since Lena and Elliot were married for 3 years. The next day, Angela Alvarez, an insurance investigator for Allied Trust Insurance, arrives at the sheriff's office. The woman is insistent on solving the murder case of Elliot Harper, but the sheriff doesn't fully trust her since it's her first big case. Angela, on the other hand, doesn't see it as a hindrance to her solving the mystery. At home, Doug receives a text message from Lena, telling him to lay low in the meantime. Meanwhile, Angela interrogates Lena at the sheriff's office. The woman responds to the questions in a shaky voice, which convinces her lawyer that she has had enough to answer. Moments after, Sheriff Jack returns to the crime scene. He receives an update on his toxicology report of Elliot, and Lem explains although the investor was drunk, his death was due to a hemorrhage in the skull. Suddenly, the chief security officer interrupts, claiming he might have had a suspect sighting on the night Elliot died. Later on, they go to the gas station where Doug and his father are refueling up. The young man approaches the officer and tries his best to act normal. He bravely converses with the officer and later finds out they have a lead on the suspect. Back at Lena's house, Angela investigates the surroundings. She takes a camera with her, documenting whatever she finds that could help the case. Sheriff Jack finds a remote and gets distracted playing with the electronic blinds of the house, losing sight of Angela. Further investigating the home, Angela calls out for the sheriff's attention, showing the crucial evidence she just found. She finds a broken window with glass shards, one having a trace of blood, so she quickly takes a photo of it. Immediately after, the police swarm Lena and Elliot's house. As the authorities further investigate, Doug worries, and Angela sees him from the window, finding him suspicious. Because of this, the young man leaves leaves his house and meets up with Carson. While Doug tries to get his mind off things, Carson confesses that Angela and the sheriff have been bombarding him with questions about Doug and his actions lately. Furthermore, he admits that he mentioned a mystery woman to the police. Upon hearing this, Doug becomes enraged, then walks away from his best friend. In his room, Doug notices some visitors arriving at their front door. The sheriff and Angela ask his parents to bring their son to the office for interrogation. Scared and unsure what to do, Doug calls Lena, but she isn't picking up the phone. While Sheriff Jack and Angela interrogate Doug, he becomes nervous and can't keep eye contact with either of them. The investigator notices the stuttering and inconsistencies of the young man's answers to their questions, so she warns him of committing a felony. However, Doug's parents don't like how the interrogation goes, and thus abruptly ends. Later at the bar, Doug leaves work after receiving a message from Lena. She mentions that they must meet at the boathouse as soon as possible. The young man arrives at the boathouse, discussing the potential pieces of evidence that may put them in jail. Lena suggests throwing away the phone and breaking them first, but the madly in love Doug refuses. As a result, they keep their phones to keep in touch with each other no matter what. Afterward, Doug goes home and finds Sheriff Jack and Angela there. The insurance investigator takes his fingerprints and a DNA swab, making the young man more nervous. Eventually, they take him with them down to the station for being a potential suspect. On their way to the station, Sheriff Jack parks to buy some coffee. Sitting at the front is Angela, bombarding Doug with questions and mentions that Lena doesn't love him but is manipulating him. The young fellow finds himself uncomfortable, begging Lem to let him out of the car. Full of fear, Doug is left with no choice and proceeds to tell Carson everything that has happened. He explains how the murder of Elliot took place, which is now putting him in trouble. Carson advises his best friend to find evidence to help him out of the police's radar. Doug pauses to think and now remembers the phones he left at the boathouse. As Doug recalls everything, he realizes that the gardener could significantly help him. In a rush, he goes to the sheriff to explain the problem. The two discuss the case, and the young man asks the sheriff for help. Desperate for redemption, the sheriff offers Doug a glass of water to calm the young man down. Meanwhile, at Doug's house, his mother finds Lena's underwear in her son's cabinet, leaving her shocked. At the bar, the sheriff convinces the young man to come clean and spare everyone from a lot of trouble. In the middle of the conversation, Doug's father calls his son and demands that he immediately goes home. The father warns his son not to talk to anyone at the moment, so Doug tells Jack to look more into the Harper's gardener before leaving. When Doug leaves, Jack uses a handkerchief to safely take the glass of water with Doug's fingerprints. He then sends the evidence at the station for further investigation. Down at the station, the sheriff expects the investigation results on the gardener. However, the insurance investigator returns and tells him the gardener was found dead. Suddenly, Lem enters and gives the result of the lab investigation, which came positive, pinpointing Doug Martin as the culprit. Hopeless, Doug confesses to his parents about what he did. While his parents cry in frustration and shock, a police car arrives at their home. Hurriedly, Doug escapes through his window and runs for the boathouse to retrieve the phones. Racing in desperation, the young man pedals his bike as fast as he can. On his way, Angela spots him and pursues, chasing the young man. Doug frantically tries to find the phone at the boathouse in their secret spot. Unexpectedly, Lena arrives in a calm demeanor, which the young man finds odd, but they kiss anyway. She then rips her clothes and removes her shades that reveal a black eye. She pushes Doug onto the floor while screaming, framing Doug of assault. Suddenly, the police arrive and take Doug to arrest him. Doug begs the sheriff for a chance to prove himself before Lena receives $10 million. Having known the man for a long time, Jack gives him 20 minutes to do what he wishes, so Doug rushes to the motel where Lena is staying. There, he finds a bag of Lena's fake passports and the phone. Unexpectedly, Angela arrives and asks him what he's doing there. Doug shows her the evidence on the phone, and in the end, he convinces, so Angela arrests Lena instead. However, the investigator cuffs him to the bed frame so he won't escape investigation after turning in the guilty woman, finally proving